Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Giordano, and today I'm joined by a Canadian race car driver, X Games athlete, stuntman, and Baja 1000 champion, Andrew Comrie-Picard. In this episode, he touches on his childhood in Alberta, Canada, and how his love for driving challenges launched his automotive career. The conversation continues with an in-depth look at Comrie-Picard's latest project, the Trans-Global Car Expedition. This project is the world's first wheeled surface navigation through both geographic poles. We talk about the importance of a good team, the scientific outcomes of the project, and a rundown of the expedition vehicle fleet. Comrie-Picard also dives into developing a strong sense of self-belief, his experiences in northern Canada, and the outcomes of an Arctic test trip where an F-150 fell through the ice. Thanks so much for joining. We hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Giordano, and my guest today is a Canadian race car driver, X Games athlete, stuntman, stunt coordinator, two-time Baja 1000 class winner, Pikes Peak hill climb record holder, former entertainment lawyer, and most recently part of the Trans-Global Car Expedition, which is the world's first wheeled surface navigation of the Earth through both geographical poles. So welcome, Andrew Comrie-Picard, to the Overland Journal Podcast. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
No, we're out of time.
Yeah,
I'm
perfect.
just kidding.
That's as much as I know.
A long intro. But yeah, thanks so much for joining me. I'm just starting my day here in Turkey. Sun's almost up, and you are wrapping up your day in LA. And it's technically yesterday, so I'm in the future.
Correct. Yeah, you look like you're from the future.
Thank you. But you haven't always been based in LA. You grew up actually in Alberta, Canada. So tell me, what would your childhood self think about how the ride's been so far?
That's a great question. So I grew up on a farm outside of Edmonton in Alberta. And I guess probably what we were doing as kids, we sort of characterized as a quasi-overlanding now. We were basically getting stuff stuck in fields and getting them unstuck again from like an early age. So all I wanted to be when I was 12 years old, and I always said, I worked on Top Gear for a time, and we always would write, when we were trying to write something interesting for people to watch, we'd say, well, the cars that people love, the activities people love are what they loved when they were 12 years old. Basically, we're pandering to adult 12-year-olds. And that's kind of what I have gotten to become, because when I was 12 years old, all I wanted to be was a race car driver or an actor. And neither of those things seemed remotely realistic coming from outside of Edmonton, Alberta. Nobody we knew had ever done anything like that. So I didn't think that was realistic. So I was reasonably good at school. And so I did, I went to school and then university, and then got a good job, and I became a lawyer, and I despised it and was terrible at it, but it made me enough money to buy a better race car. I started racing stuff when I was a kid, dirt bikes, snowmobiles, BMX bikes before that, and then RC cars actually even before that, which was really my inroad into racing. And I ended up as a preteen traveling the world racing RC cars for sponsors and things, and it was pretty serious. And I always say about 80% of what I learned about racing, I actually learned in model cars. Well, then I scaled that up, and I eventually had like $2,000, bought a cheap rally car, and one thing led to another, and then I got into racing, and then I got into stunts, and then I got into all this stuff.
Wow, what a journey. And I feel like it's very much of the time of our sort of generation, maybe, that we're looking at what our parents are doing as kind of like this roadmap to what we should be doing with our lives. And so much has changed in the world since then and going forward, and with your kids too. And it seems like these careers that you could never dream of even existing exist now, or you can be creative with what you want to do, and there's so much more flexibility now.
Yeah, well, certainly, with technology, teleconferencing, and the ability to connect across distances like you and I are doing right now, it's incredible. Like, you don't have to be anywhere. I think it's really opened up a lot of possibilities for not just remote work, but overlanders and people who just want to live alternative lifestyles. I mean, my high school guidance counselor had a certain number of jobs listed in his book that you could do. Their lawyer was in there, but nothing else of what I do is in there. And I like to do a portfolio of stuff. And everybody that I know who's happy and adventurous and out in the world is doing a portfolio of things. They may have a mainline thing, or they may, and I do work for Ford. I do work for, I'm on the Trans-Global Expedition. I've got a business within tires, and I like it because I like to not get involved in just one thing. And that's realistically possible these days. It's kind of a gig economy for all of us. And just like you, I think, you're traveling, you're writing in different outlets, you're overlanding. You get to piece it together the way you want it. And I love that. because each of us is unique. And why wouldn't you get to build your own unique arc?
Yeah, I love that. I want to get into the Transglobal Car expedition shortly, but tell me a little bit about like what you kind of touched on it a little bit there with all the things that you're doing, but you have like a big broad portfolio. But what are some of the things that keep you busy kind of on a daily basis?
Whew, yeah, well, so I've got right now, I've got a particularly wide range of stuff going on. The expedition, I'm playing a little hooky from the expedition. Actually, the team is in Panama City, getting ready to go through South America or Central America, heading back north after circumnavigating almost all the globe. We're nearly done. I had to come back to Los Angeles because I have a mobile tire company that has trucks that come to your driveway and put tires on cars where you are. It's called Zip Tire. I founded that when I got out of racing 8 years ago last week, actually, and realized that we could take all our race equipment out to people, civilians in the field, and put tires on where they are instead of them having to suffer through a tire store. So that's one big thing I have going on. And the expedition's going on. That company more or less ran without me while I was gone, and now I'm back arms deep in it. I've got my family, of course, but I've also got some other things. I do brand representative stuff for Ford. So if you go into a Ford dealer, there are like videos playing in the dealership and I like explaining things. I'm kind of an explainer, and I have enough background in technology. I didn't take an engineering degree, but I did physics, and I can speak with the engineers well enough that they believe that I understand what they're saying, and then I can explain it in human. So I say one of the big things that I do is translate engineering into human. And if you walk into a Ford dealer, you'll see a video of me saying, why do you need anti-nibble control on your steering? How does that fight a crosswind and things like that? So I do these explainer videos that explain how stuff works, and I love that. So that's a major thing. I work with Ford on that, and then I am now getting involved again. I was involved a little bit in the early days, but I'm getting involved in autonomous vehicles. Because of my years of racing and stunts, I still do movie stunts. I did another feature film in Dubai for a month last fall, and I love doing the stunts because it's a little like overlanding or a little like racing. It's this sort of team of crazy people who's able to do very improbable, difficult things. And, your only challenge is like, I wonder if we could, make a car go off that, or I wonder if we could, go up that vertical wall and slide around it. And I love that kind of stuff. So I still do the movie stuff, but now I'm getting into vehicle autonomy because autonomous vehicles are getting a lot better, quite good, almost good enough that you can ride in them. And I'm now concerned with how to make them drive a lot better. So I also have a company that is working on the algorithms to improve what we call planning and motion controls of autonomous vehicles. So I kind of, I like that. I like having my fingers in a lot of different pies. Almost everything that I do, except for my family in particular, but everything else kind of revolves around some kind of automobile. And I think that makes sense. I was always a car kid. I came from a car family, and I like challenges with cars. Like my whole life, I've just tried to do hard things with cars. From getting stuck as a kid, I rolled my dad's pickup truck when I was 7. I, got stuck in fields. I had to fix trucks and had dune buggies and stuff all through the era. So that was that was kind of my origin story, and that's what I still do. I just do hard things with cars.
Fantastic. Yeah. I was wondering, I think a lot of people would be like a stunt driver and Hollywood, what is that like? But I'm kind of curious about like what were your biggest life takeaways from being a stunt driver? Like big lessons
That's interesting.
learned or
So one of the things about stunt driving, and I still do it, and I've done it for 15 or 20 years now. And like in Fast and Furious, part of the Fast and Furious franchise, Deadpool, stuff like that. My favorite one's Atomic Blonde. I'm a KGB officer in Atomic Blonde. Actually, I get to be a bad guy, and I'm driving one of the bad guy cars, and then I'm driving Charlize Theron's car from the back seat. She's in the front seat, and I'm driving the car from a second set of controls in the back seat. That's a good day in my office. But what I learned is, some people are very talented, like across the board. You don't survive in the I was going to say sport. You don't survive in the business unless you have a lot of talent. But you have to be really easy to work with, likable. You have to be able to connect with people. That's all great, and you can have all those things and still not be able to do the one thing that's really, really crucial, and that is in the moment where they call action. Like you wait around for hours and days and days and days. You may be there for a couple of weeks and practice and rehearse and so on, and then in the moment of action, you got to perform right now. And you may only have 10 seconds of what you have to do, right? It could be weeks leading up to it. And you have to have the belief, and you're the guy or gal, like you got to just believe that you're going to deliver. And that's, I like that challenge. It's consistent with racing. It was like X Games I competed at, 5 times and finally won a medal after flipping end over end and messing up a bunch of times. But you had to come back and believe in yourself and have the technical skills, have all the other skills. But in the moment, you have to believe that you can do it. And we had moments on the Transglobal expedition crossing the North Pole, like really hard, tricky, like in terms of off-roading and overlanding, gnarly and dangerous stuff. And the South Pole a little bit less so, because Arctic Trucks has Antarctica so screwed down that it's relatively, I mean, it's in the overlanding world. It's a good overlanding challenge, but it's a technical challenge, but not moment to moment as much of a driving challenge. It's hard too, but it's the same thing on expedition. And many of your viewers and friends have been on like the Camel Trophy stuff, or rock crawling or rock racing, all that stuff. You have moments where I call it brinksmanship. It is a thing, brinksmanship, where you're right out on the edge and there's no margin, and you have to rely on your skills and your self-belief to get you through. And that's the biggest takeaway for me from stunts, is that you have to have that aspect to your personality. And to your question about what it's the takeaway, or what's it like in Hollywood, it's true of all actors. We're all narcissists probably, but everybody believes in themselves and believes that they can deliver. But even in the Hollywood community, if you're a stunt person, it's kind of nice, because people are like, oh, even actors, fairly famous actors, like, oh, you're the stunt guy. That's so cool. What are you going to do? Like, how's it going to work? Because, if you screw up your acting lines or don't deliver it with great emotion or whatever, it's like, take again, But if I go to slide the car with Charlize Theron in it and I hit something, or in that case, there was a guy with a Steadicam like walking around us as I did a reverse 180 blind. Like, if I'd hit that cameraman, the stakes are huge, right? And then for guys and gals who do, falls and wire work and fight stunts, and I'm a terrible. I've done fights in movies, but I look terrible. Fire burns and stuff. Like, the stakes are high, and that's part of the fun, though. I mean, that's the adrenaline, and the challenge is part of the reason we do it. And the ability to deliver in the moment is the satisfaction you take away at the end of the day. And then you have great stories too, like just like you do in overlanding. Like, and then I broke an axle and I had to hike out 22 miles, and all that stuff. It's like we actually intentionally put ourselves in really hard situations just to see if we can get out.
Yes, absolutely. And then there's this thing, like, how do you think that you can do it, but then you have to believe that you can do it. You can't just think that you can do it. It has to be like right in there, that you believe you can do it. And I think there's a difference there. I think I could talk myself into thinking I can do some things, but truly believing is
You know
takes
what it is?
practice or something.
I've been thinking about this a little lately, because I've been trying to tease out. In Antarctica, we were really lucky to meet a lot of explorer people who've skiing 1,000 kilometers to the South Pole. Some of them are truly exploring, like going to new places or going to unclimbed routes on peaks and things, right? And I was trying to distill what's common between all of them. And in all of them, there's a passion, a curiosity, and a passion for a challenge. But you're quite right that the self-belief has to be huge. But I think that all of them and us probably built up to it. Like, nobody wakes up in the middle of their sort of, Walter Mitty midlife and says, what I have to do is go and ski 1,000 kilometers to the South Pole. Well, there are people who do that, I suppose. But you can take your own micro challenges, or start out with micro challenges, and that may be just, hey, overlanding to the next town, or getting through the Rubicon. I mean, that's pretty big deal. Or getting through a single feature on the Rubicon Trail, and then piecing it all together, and then camping out there. You can, until eventually you're hungry enough, like, hey, how do I get into the Rebelle Rally, or how do I get into the Camel Trophy, or the modern equivalent, or how do I get into rally racing, or expeditions, or how do I go across the North Pole? And so that's what happened with me, is that's how I got involved in the Transglobal Car Expedition. We'll talk about it, I'm sure, but I was trying to find, like, what's the hardest thing I can do, because I've done the X Games, I've done Baja 1000, I've done Pikes Peak, but that started by being in a muddy field behind our farm with a dirt bike, saying, I wonder if I can get over that mound. And I wonder if I can go fast enough to jump over that board. And I wonder if I can modify this to be able to do a different thing. Or what if I roll the dune buggy, but I got to roll all the way back over onto its wheels? And I was an only child, so I just got to, I had friends around and stuff, but I got to mess around a lot on my own. And that ended up being super helpful, because I just got to be out there with lots of time and weaponry of machinery, and just push a little further. I wonder if I can do that. I wonder if I can do that. And the natural extension is, I wonder if I can drive around the world.
Yeah, confidence building one little step at a time over time. And that was a great segue into how you went from racing, stunt driving. How did the Transglobal Car Expedition come up for you? How did you become involved with that?
So it is sort of a dual path on this. I had won the North American Rally Championship 9, and then I was lucky enough to get a couple of additional factory rides. I'd been driving for Mitsubishi, but then I drove for Toyota and then for Ford, and then we won the John Woodner Cup in America, which is a pretty hotly contested class championship, two-wheel drive class championship. And then then Ford got out of rallying suddenly in 2014, let's say 2013, 2014. And we just won the championship. And I was like, oh, well, I guess that's it. I'm probably done rallying now. And okay. So I just won this additional rally championship, and I was 40 something. And I was thinking, well, I've, done these really hard things with cars. I love doing hard things with cars from being a kid on. And most of what I've done is I've done some track racing also, and endurance racing, Porsche endurance racing and stuff. But most of what I've done has been like some kind of adventure racing or rally racing, desert racing, what I consider the hard time trial stuff out in the field. I then started to think about what's the hardest thing you can possibly do with a vehicle. And I had met through Top Gear, the team at Arctic Trucks, and in particular, Emil Grimson from Iceland. And I knew that if you wanted to go, especially to the South Pole, you got to go with Arctic Trucks because they're the people who do it. And they have it all nailed down. They've done, 400,000 kilometers in Antarctica now. And if you want to go across the North Pole, no, the only people who've gotten close with a normal type vehicle are also Arctic Trucks, who helped Top Gear, us effectively, get there in 2007. And so I started to piece together a pitch that I took to first Ford and then Jeep and Netflix and Discovery Channel, who I'd worked with. And I'm trying to get over the line the idea of what I call pole to pole, and then from the South Pole to the North Pole. I also was fascinated with the Darien Gap. So the jungle between Panama and Colombia, about 60 miles, half swamp, half mountains, is, to me, like there's lots of great overlanding challenges in the world, but it's like, the key to the Trans North American Highway. It's insanity hard. Like, 1970, 150 British military men tried to get through and several died. And Mark Smith, a legend in overlanding, took a crew through from the South. And then one guy and his wife, Lauren Upton and Patty Upton, who you probably know,
Yeah.
went through, and actually, to my mind, they're the only ones who did it completely without going up or downstream, and they were incredible. So I then ended up interviewing everybody or somebody from every team that had ever been through the Darien with a vehicle. And I just done a huge, and this is 15 years ago now. And I went out and where Lauren and Patty used to stay in the desert out by Blythe in the winters, I went out and interviewed them, and they showed me their journals and showed me the drawings of the pulleys on the ends of the bumpers and the nicest thing about that, I don't know if Patty will be upset about the story, but I cold called them in Idaho, I guess they lived. And I said, hey, I found their number. I said, hey, you don't know me, but I want to drive through the Darien. And Patty said, well, we drove through the Darien. I'm like, that's why I'm calling you. And she said, well, you better talk to Lauren. And she said, Lauren. And Lauren comes like, hey, sir, you don't know me, but I want to drive through the Darien. I'm like, I drove through the Darien. Like, I know. That's why I want to talk to you. And he was full of profanities. But, well, pal, Andrew, how are you going to do it? And I'd love to do all the swearing, but the podcast would turn off. But he the best thing was, like, he checked me out for 10 minutes on the phone, and then he pivoted and said, all right, you're going to do this. And here's how I screwed up. I started a week too late and I went the wrong direction. And then I got stuck on the rains and I had to sit there for 300 days watching bananas grow. Here's how you're going to do it. And it was so inspiring. And so I'm tearing up just remembering it. Because it's, a little like that self-belief, right? And there's a guy, Lauren Upton, there's a guy who had a lot of self-belief. He was cutting down trees to build bridges. So he was a civil engineer, effectively. He was a bridge builder. But that kind of level of, like, a guy like that believing in me, that I'm the guy. I'm like, yeah, all right, here, we're going to do it. Right? And so I pitched that for years, and I never quite got it over the line, money-wise, really. I remember distinctly Netflix saying, the development guy there that I knew, saying, hey, Andrew, I know you really want to do this, and I think it's great too, but I don't, it's missing a human aspect. If you want to take your kids, who are then like 2 and 3 years old, if you want to take your kids, I'll greenlight it tomorrow. And I was like, I can't do that. I can't do that because they were like, 2 and 4 years old or something at that point. And I'm not going to take them through Colombia at that point, in a huge, expensive, dangerous vehicle that could get robbed. And I didn't want to take my kids through. And look, the Darien also has like 2 truly deadly snakes, several deadly spiders. very evil fire ants. It's a fantastic place. And, there are others, friends of mine in the community, Chris Collard and Chris Walker and Guy, and I think Scott Brady himself, we're all like, oh, the Darien someday. But now it's also, when the FARC rebels ran it, more or less, and I even got like one of the fixers, Carlos. Well, it was Lauren Upton's fixer, Carlos, a Colombian guy, who was like, in this picture of him in the '70s, like with a shark tooth necklace and shirt off and whatever, going through the Darien with Lauren. And then we got together here, and he's like a 3-piece suit Colombian man, by that time in his '70s, now passed away. But I had him like just warming people up in Turbo and Cartagena to like get this thing done, but we didn't get over the line. So, I had all the planning, had all the route, had involved Emil Grimson of Arctic Trucks in the route, as you say. If you want to go somewhere, you want him on your route planning, and we'd made a really great pitch of it. And then about, I guess, 5 years ago, I put on the back burner, started my business. And about 5-6 years ago now, he called me up and said, "Andrew, your idea, a man is going to do it. You should meet each other." And so I said, okay, great. And that was Vasily Shagnovsky, who'd come up with what is now the Transglobal Car Expedition. And I wanted to just go South Pole to North Pole continuously on the surface, except for the ocean between Antarctica and South America. He wanted to go all the way around the world from one point back to the same point through both poles. And that's not only what I wanted to do, but more down the other side. And so I said, great. And I linked up with him and the Transglobal Car Expedition that he was already building. Because of my experience with vehicles, nobody from that side was really a vehicle person. And because of my sort of experience with media, I ended up coming on as a main team member, and now I've been one of the core members of the team. So it's been a real privilege for me. Again, like guys who I think have incredible pedigree, like Scott Brady and Chris Collard and Chris Walker, all these guys who are guys who, deserve to do this kind of expedition. I feel like I've kind of had an end game around it and got to go to Everest before climbing some smaller mountains. But we've had to solve some huge logistical problems and some huge technical problems to make it happen. And it's been a very suitable challenge for all of us. Long answer to a simple question, but there it is.
Oh, no, that's great. I want to get into those logistics problems and chat about that. But before that, maybe we'll just touch briefly on the general route from pole to pole.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
with some
Well,
other things in between.
Sure. We had a lot of debate about where to start or end from. But, many historic races, like there was a round the world race that started from New York City in 1908 with vehicles. And, there's the Great Peking to Paris races in the 1907 and so on. But the first round the world race started from New York City. And there are a couple. I mean, I'm Canadian. I brought an American, one of my old rally techs who's been on the expedition the whole way through. He's an American. We have Germans, Icelandics, a lot of Icelandics and Russians, Ukrainians, Georgians. Like it's a real mixed bag of people. But we decided to start in the U.S. anyway, because that's sort of where the spiritual heart of expedition starting is, in New York. And the Explorers Club is there, and a couple of us were members. I wasn't yet, but I am now. And and the media attention in North America is sort of very savvy with this kind of thing, big adventure stuff. So we decided to start from New York City, and of course you have to return to New York City from the other end. So I had styled it south to north, South Pole to North Pole, because if you're going to do it in as quick a time as possible, you have to start on the South Pole, say around Christmas, get through the Darien in February before the rains come. Lauren Upton would tell you. And then you got to get to the edge of the Arctic Ocean in the north, just as the first light comes, but the ice is still firm. And so I had styled it south to north as a result. Transglobal flipped that on its head a little and started from New York and got to the North Sea ice, or the Arctic Ocean ice, just as the light was coming up. So we did that last February, March. And then we spent the rest of the next year crossing out through Europe and Africa so that we could be arriving at the other coast of Antarctica in November and get to the South Pole like around Christmas. And so the seasonality is the same, but it's just because it's a lap starting from New York, it just offset by, say, 180 days or something, kind of not quite, but it offset the schedule. So what was your question? Huge planning, logistics?
Yes. So logistics, I'm
Seasonality.
sure. I mean, you have multiple teams doing different legs. Some team members are doing multiple legs. I believe some maybe doing one leg, and then you have quite a selection of vehicles. So you have like different vehicles doing different sections, and then you have to get people, vehicles, permits, people from all over the world going through all different places in the world. And I'm assuming, well, I know you did at least one test trip up north. So yeah,
Oh yeah.
maybe just touch on coordinating all of that and how
Yeah.
difficult
Well,
was
it's funny. I
that?
was self-conscious a couple of minutes ago. My phone kept buzzing, and that was actually the logistics guy. We have a team. Like there's actually there's two team members back in Europe whose concern is how to get all the vehicle carnets and do all the logistical planning and flights and all that stuff. The principle is that we're not to leave the surface, going around the surface of the Earth in circumnavigation. The core of that is that there are really three guys who have been and will have been on the surface the whole way through, pretty much the whole way through. I sadly have not been able to be one of them, not because I wouldn't have been invited to, but because I've had to come back to take care of some other stuff. But I've been there for what I consider the really hard parts, which is the Arctic crossing, and I've been there for a lot of it. But I did. Will not do all of South America. I will not do all of Central America. Those are places I'm hoping to go back to with my family and do more wheeling through there. But I did the entire crossing of the Arctic from Canada to Greenland and the entire crossing of Antarctica, including from Cape Town and an icebreaker. So those are the super hard technical parts. But the expedition leader, Vasily Shagnovsky, the expedition cinematographer, Max Badalin, who's a great National Geographic experienced cameraman, who he and I became very close because I'm responsible for the media stuff. So I'm directing with him all the content, and we've had a wonderful. Sometime in the near future, very near, we hope, we'll be able to release a documentary on it, and including smaller segments. It's really been a beautiful thing to shoot. Several drones and incredible footage from around the world. Incredible, scenery. Europe, but Africa, South America, Peru, just unbelievable stuff. So we have great content. But Max has been there throughout, and one other mountain climber, Alexei Safonov, who's a very experienced climber, very experienced traveler, has been with Vasily and the team pretty much the whole way. So those three guys have committed basically 18 months of their lives to only be doing this. I wasn't able to
Wow.
make that commitment, so I've gone for all the hard parts and a few of the beautiful parts.
Fantastic. Yeah, not a lot of people can take that much time to focus on one project like that. So,
Yeah,
great.
it's heartbreaking for me to leave some of the beautiful places, but I reckon that you only get one shot. Like you really only get one shot at the North Pole. I don't know that anybody's ever going to do it again, not in our lifetimes, or maybe not ever as a result because of the change in the ice cap. Antarctica, never been done the way that we did it, crossing right across from Progress Station to Hubble Glacier, but or to the ocean, south of the Union Glacier. North technically of Union Glacier. The South Pole is doable again by people. The North Pole was incredibly hard. So I feel pretty lucky to have been able to do both of them.
Yeah, tell me, I guess we're getting ahead. We'll get back to logistics, but I want to touch on this first while we're here,
Yeah.
because you're mentioning that section may not be able to be done again, and I want to dive into that. Like, what did you see? I know that you had some science projects going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about the details of why you think that section may not be doable again
Yeah.
in
Well,
that
look,
way.
we
Yeah,
know, we know, so we know that the Arctic ice cap is getting smaller. We've seen the data. Emil has been tracking the data for 15 plus years now, every year on year. And we have great friends, a German ice scientist who we work with a lot, Christian Haas, who we work through the historical data with him. And you can see it's getting smaller. It breaks up earlier. The weather's changing. The migration patterns of animals are changing. We've seen it with the indigenous people we've spoken to. And I want to talk about the indigenous people if we get a chance. Don't let me forget.
please do.
But yeah, wonderful. But we can see it's getting smaller. But one of the things, actually, to speak of our science work, that is very difficult to analyze. So satellites and radar from space are pretty good at showing us the square kilometerage of ice cover in the Arctic. Right, every year it freezes so far, it melts so far, it freezes so far. Right, but it's very poor at showing the ice thickness. And of course, if you want to understand how much ice is up there, you crucially have to know the ice thickness. And that is surveyed normally by drilling holes in the ice by people and measuring how thick the ice is. It's really hard and it's expensive and dangerous. You might be able to fly a twin otter onto an unknown piece of ice, or maybe take a helicopter, but that's incredibly expensive. Or guys who've tried skiing and snowmobiling, and then you can take a few data points or whatever. But with Christian Haas, who had actually a Canadian-made device, an electromagnetic resonant device, which basically shoots a beam down into the ice. And when it hits salt water, it bounces back to the other side. If you look in the back of one of our amphibious vehicles, there's a long bar on the back of it, plastic bar, mounted on plywood because it can't be too near to metal. So we have this fancy plywood mount built from pieces of wooded Canadian Tire and Yellowknife. But it gave us was a constant reading and a log of the ice thickness continuously as we went along. And because, we did 3 pre-expeditions, which I can tell you about, to test, to find a new route. And Emil can tell you too, that we innovated a new route that nobody had ever taken a wheeled vehicle from the continental shelf to the Arctic Ocean, right? So we went from the northernmost diamond mine north of Yellowknife on Cotuito Lake, a diavic diamond mine. And we drove overland over the tundra on a route that Emil figured out from space imagery to get to, and relief maps, to get to Bathurst Inlet and the ocean. Incredible. I mean, it's the first ever. It's like climbing Everest with a car. And we were able to do that. Anyway, the point of the story is that we were able to get this ice thickness measuring machine. And the first day our first pre-expeditions, we only had in-reach communicators. So we're like texting with 144 character old-fashioned phone stuff. But in the last 2 years, we got Starlink. It's changed the game. So we hooked the data from the magnetic resonant device up to the Starlink, and we fed the data continuously to the ice scientists in Germany about the thickness of the ice. And that matters not, the biggest thing there is that it matters not just for the actual path that we followed going over the North Pole, but they're now able to take that data and compare it to the satellite and radar data that estimates how thick that ice is to do what's called ground truthing. So if you look at, and I can show you graphs, but if you look at how thick the satellites think the ice is, and then you look at episodes where they've actually gone and measured how thick the ice is, they can see that they're actually overestimating by quite a large degree how thick the ice is. And so what we've been able to do is give that constant data stream, which they're working on it now, be able to compare with the true thickness of the data in the satellite in order to refine further the data from the satellites, which is really exciting to us. And you could only do that if you had a vehicle that's going to go all the way across, or a way to go all the way across the North Pole in a continuous arc with power and with enough power to haul it and with electrical power, right? It's hard as a skier and a sled, or it's impossible almost any other way. So that was a unique thing that we were able to offer on a science perspective. And then the other thing that's really kind of fun, I knew nothing about cosmic rays. Like I know, like I say, I studied physics, so I have enough to be dangerous. But we were linked up with scientists at CERN in Switzerland, the huge Hadron Collider, the particle accelerator outside of Geneva. And they said, hey, we got this kind of cool project if you're kind of interested. And it was kind of a skunk works project for them, a few guys like moonlighting. But they built what are called scintillators, which are like, there's a huge scintillator at the South Pole. There's one I'm pointing out like it's over here. There's one in Chicago. There's one at CERN in Switzerland. And what they're doing is measuring. So 95% of the universe is dark matter. We don't know what it is. We don't know where it comes from, and the energy that comes from it is not very well understood. Cosmic rays, muons, and it hits the Earth's atmosphere and interacts with particles in the Earth's outer atmosphere, which causes them to accelerate, and they take crazy paths on crazy angles. And you are right now being barraged by cosmic rays, and you don't realize it. It's a little like, think of it like ultraviolet, but it goes through walls and anything but thick lead. Yeah, thick lead and concrete. In fact, we have one of the fun things is we have one of our miniaturized scintillators, and it has a little flashing green LED light on it, and you can just keep going wink, 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 and I hold it beside somebody and say, every time that goes off, a cosmic ray has just hit this thing. And people are like, get crazy. But it's true. So, and what's important about cosmic rays, nobody really understands what they do or why they matter, except they know that they have a function in the formation of clouds. We've been in the cloud chamber in CERN in Switzerland, where there's a crazy-haired English scientist. Like, hey, you've got to come in the cloud chamber. Just come in. Hey, watch your head. Exactly who you want a crazy scientist to be, like the doc from Back to the Future. And they're trying to figure out how this has an effect on clouds. And the one that even blew me away more. So cosmic rays follow like a magnetic flux pattern around the Earth, and they curve inwards at the poles. And the one correlation that has been spotted with cosmic rays is seismic activity. With a 2-week lead time, changes in cosmic ray patterns can correlate to increased seismic activity on Earth, earthquakes. Now, they can't tell you necessarily where the earthquake's going to be, and it's probably because something in the Earth's magma is shifting, and it's causing the pattern of the cosmic rays to fluctuate. 2 weeks later, they can see it with like 2 degrees of standard deviation of certainty. They can see that there's a change in the in seismic activity. That's important and significant. Data on cosmic ray penetration had never been collected north of 82 degrees north. And so we took 3 cosmic ray detectors right across, and it was my job to so they were miniaturized by these guys at CERN, and then I had to like figure out the battery systems and stuff with them. And then in the vehicle that I was in, the amphibious vehicle that I was in, I maintained these things like all the time and was downloading the data and then uploading it, also through Starlink to them. And we've we're the first people ever to take the same scintillators all the way around the Earth. So we have consistent machinery reading that cosmic ray data all the way around the planet. So that's exciting too. And the folks back in Switzerland are like chewing on that data now. And we have some other projects besides citizen science projects, which enable people to participate in their own scientific experiments based on cosmic ray data, and some other things besides. But in fact, the guys at CERN are looking at, guys and ladies at CERN are looking at how to use a citizen science sort of crowdsourced team to analyze the data that we brought back. So we had a huge amount of data. So that was really exciting for me. And I'm the science liaison officer because, again, I have just enough science to be dangerous and I can explain the stuff and run the machines. So that's been exciting for me also to be able to contribute that. Because, look, all of us in the overlanding community or in racing or whatever, like, we understand why we're doing this. It's a challenge. It's really hard. It's something that we really want to achieve. But, if you're going to do something like this, you want it to be meaningful and have a lasting effect too. And, on the one hand, I've met so many kids and we've done so many activations at schools all the way from the Arctic all the way to South Africa. And, I've been able to go to these small communities and talk to kids, talk to families and make them excited about exploration, about overlanding, about hard off-road work, and then also about these science things that we're doing. And I really get a great satisfaction in that. So yes, I got to cross the North and South Poles, but more important, ultimately, we got to light up some kids' eyes and we got to hopefully make some contributions to the science data.
For sure. Yeah, I love that aspect. And on I believe, the Transglobal website, there's a link for, like, if I wanted to go on there and contribute to that, I can do so as well.
Yeah.
So it's
another
fun.
tweak is that you can turn your phone, it's not perfect, but incredibly, if you seal off your phone camera from all light with like some black duct tape, it can be turned into a reasonable approximation of a cosmic ray detector, because those cosmic rays penetrate through the tape and the lens and everything to the sensor inside. And so one of the things we have is a cosmic ray collection competition that you can participate in. So yeah, go to the transglobalcar.com website and sign up for that. And there have been teams. We had school teams from Lebanon, from Africa, from the DRC, from Congo, Middle East. These kids, they actually came to Switzerland, and they came and shared the data with us, and we did a big scientific activation with them. Really wonderful stuff. And it's been great to see people participate in that, because it's great that we get to go around the world and collect all this data. But why not enable people? And as you say, I've got 2 kids. Like, there's nothing like seeing a kid go like, really, I can do that too. And just like, I got to say like, oh, really, I can do this with a car. They're like, really, I can collect scientific data. I can log on and put that information somewhere. Yeah. It's fun. It's awesome.
Very cool. Very cool. I love that. So you go up and do a few test trips. You said a few test trips up north? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the data that you actually collected on the ice thickness perhaps would have helped. Is this an accurate statement during one of those test trips? Because there were a few things. Yeah. Yes.
So you're getting the vehicle fell through the ice. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yes, I am. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. So look, we're all pretty experienced. Nobody's more experienced than Emil Grimson and the Arctic Trucks team at driving on ice, really. But you can always make mistakes and you can always learn more. And we did. Technically speaking, we did 2 true full test runs in the Arctic, and then another trip besides. Well, actually, the third trip was an extraction trip in the end. But on our first test expedition in 2020, I'm losing date, 2022, we went up and innovated that route that I told you about from Yellowknife to the Bathurst Inlet to the Arctic Ocean. And by the way, right to the Northwest Passage, right to where the Franklin ship sank, if you're a Northwest Passage nerd, or yeah. And it happens, this is completely random, but a friend of mine from college was the guy who from Parks Canada was instrumental in finding those ships. He was the guy actually on the radar sonar when they found the Erebus. Yeah.
Oh
And
my
so we've had
gosh.
some fun, like Dr. Livingston, I presume, stuff where we've run into each other in Joe Haven in Nunavut and said, "Oh, I say, you're here looking for the ships. Oh, your expedition's in town. Oh, your expedition's in town." And we like, "Oh, do you need any air tanks?" "Oh, we do. Yes, we'll go out. Take ours." Really, it's wonderful stuff. But anyway, to back up, um, but I do love that Explorers Club type stuff. In 2022, we went up with 3 Arctic trucks converted Ford F-150s and these 4 hand-built Russian Yumalia amphibious vehicles by a real genius in Russia named Vasily Yelagin, who created these vehicles. Well, we can talk more about that. But we went up to test this route and innovated this overland route and to test the vehicles to see how far they could go and so on. And it was, on the face of it, a total success. We got all the way to Resolute, which is like at 72, 73 degrees north. The last civilian Inuit community in the north. After that, there's a military base, but that's it, right? And it's as far north as you can get with normal civilian traffic. And we went over the ocean, so we didn't take civilian traffic, but we got there, and it's like it was a huge achievement. And that's actually where we wanted to get there, because we knew that from there it was possible to go further north, because that's the route that Emil Grimson had innovated with Top Gear several years previous, or 15 years previous, to get to a place called Isaacson, which had been the magnetic North Pole in 1996. Magnetic North Pole moves because the Earth's flux. But we wanted to connect that dot to make sure that we could get from Yellowknife to Resolute, and we did. And then I stayed up there with the Russian team with the amphibious vehicles to test some more. And the Icelandic guy said, "Okay, we're just going to drive back to Yellowknife." And they literally turned back the next day on the same route that we had driven north. And they, with 2 of the vehicles, we'd left one in Cambridge Bay, but with 2 of the vehicles, they hightailed back south. Very experienced guys, experienced drivers, with an Inuit guide, and with with the American technician I told you about, the old rally technician of mine, who'd helped build the trucks. They got down in the time of the setting sun, like 9 p.m. at night. The sun was going down. They got to an area near what we call the Tasmanian Islands. There's a better Indigenous name for it, but they, just to shorten the story, one truck was ahead, the second truck was following, and the second truck started cracking through the ice. And the guy, Torvi, a very experienced Icelandic guy, got on the radio and said, "We're going in, we're going in." He realized the ice was cracking. And already by that time, the left rear wheel had ripped off, and he wasn't able to get the driver's door open. They'd gone down far enough in the ice. Our Indigenous guy, great guy, Brendan, who we'd worked with the previous year too, or that was the first year, I guess, but great guy. We've become great friends. He was able to jump out the passenger side, totally climbed over, left his passport, left everything, all the electronics stuff in the vehicle, and it started to sink in. Incredibly, they were like soaked up to their shins in their socks because they had their shoes off driving. They were standing on the ocean ice now in the most populated polar bear region of the world in the setting sun, with only one other vehicle on the surface that was a little further ahead of them, but fortunately had stopped because of what Torvi said on the radio. And then Torvi had further presence of mind to say, "Oh my gosh, all our camping equipment's on the back of this truck." And he jumped back on the sinking truck and started unstrapping stuff and hucking it to the ice. And they got off enough to have a tent and some other equipment. And it sank. Now, fortunately, it sank in about 40 feet of water because they were between 2 islands. And this is where it gets more interesting. So we looked at the data. Well, it got exciting because I was still up in Resolute, and I was the last guy still awake on the expedition, and I was on the very spotty internet up there through one of the lodges, through the only lodge you can stay at. I got a message from Emil, who was back in Iceland, saying, "Trucks through the ice." And I looked at the trackers, and sure enough, one of them gone dark. And I knew what that meant. I knew it meant that 400 kilometers south of us, 4 guys and 1 truck were somehow out in the wild, 400 kilometers from anybody, like anything, more maybe 600. Nobody camping out on the land at that time of year, no Indigenous people. The nearest community would have been Telokak, and no way to, mobilize anybody from there. So they were on their own devices. Now, we had a SARS plan. We had access to helicopters. We'd paid Ken Boric Air, which is a specialist extraction team. They were on standby, but they couldn't go at night. Couldn't go there. And so we had some satellite communication with them. This is before Starlink. And they made it through the night. In the morning, so they sat in the other vehicle, sort of cooling their heels and hoping they didn't fall through during the night. They started poking around with an ice pick that we have, and sure enough, all of the ice around them was paper thin. And we looked at the data, and it turns out that 5 days previously, it had been over 30 or 40 centimeters thick, which is plenty thick for us. In 5 days, it had gone down to 10 centimeters. So there's a reason. Turns out that, unbeknownst to us, but known to a certain number of Indigenous people and we hadn't talked to the right Indigenous people, that is a place where the ice melts really early in the season and is known as a very good hunting ground because that's where the ice melts and the seals start popping up to the surface. Turns out the current between the Atlantic Ocean and the Arctic Ocean flows through a place called the Bellot Strait, which never freezes because the current is so high. And then it turns south and, like a freight train, runs right between these islands just south of the Bellot Strait. And so it melts really fast and really early. And we had no idea. Now, we had hired Indigenous guides. I'd become very friendly with people in Cambridge Bay, which is the real sort of core of the central Inuit culture there, to the extent that it's my incredible privilege, and having spent time with the people, especially like a family there, that they blessed me with an Indigenous name. They call me Omegoktok, which means man with thin lips, which doesn't mean that I have particularly. It's not that I have particularly thin lips. It's not exactly Dances with Wolves, but it's the name of an elder in their community and a family in their community. It's a great honor to have that name bestowed on me. Yeah. And so, I mean, I am still in constant contact with these people. Like, they've made clothes for me. They said, you're going north, you're going to need a beaver, warmer on your neck. They sewed it in my parka. Like, they made me gloves. It's incredible. The warmest, funniest people. And Bessie is sort of my wife there because she was married to the elder that I'm named after. But she has a wicked sense of humor and kind of naughty, and they're so fun and so interesting. And it would unlock for me this inroad into this completely distinct culture. I grew up in Edmonton, which is almost as close as you can grow up to Inuit people, short of Yellowknife, I guess, or Dawson City or something. I had no idea what I didn't know. And now that we've learned more about the sort of shamanism and some of the mysticism, and I've slept in igloos with them, and like, wow, it's fascinating to me, and I'm going back. But anyway, the point of the story is we'd made lots of friends in the Inuit community up there, right? And we talked to them, hey, this is where we're going, and this is the route we're taking. And they're like, oh, okay, that sounds great. Well, you should take one of our guides along, It turns out that the hunting grounds there are very regionalized, right? And not that many people from any community have traveled that far in any particular direction. And so we went from Cambridge Bay to Resolute. There's a place over here, there's Joe Haven in between, which is where the Roald Amundsen, who finally crossed the Northwest Passage, left his boat, the Joy, GJOA, left it in the harbor until only some decades ago and got repatriated to Norway. Incredible stuff. But there's another community over here called Torokayok. It took me a long time to say that correctly, and they still correct me. But the hunters from Torokayok, hopefully one will be listening and say, oh, like that. It's their hunting ground around the area that we went in. We'd never been to Torokayok. We didn't even think of it. It wasn't anywhere near our route. But they knew that around the Tasmanian Islands, the ice gets thin. And so we know it now. And so the truck dropped in. And the guys got out, and they made it through the night, and we got a helicopter up there the next day, and we choppered them out. They left the other truck. They managed to get it to the island right next to it. The next summer, we went, and with an incredible effort, got that truck out. It was epic. And as much as all our winter antics are pretty hard, I can also tell you that we flew up to like Zodiac inflatables in a Chinook helicopter, which had to be staged up from southern BC. And I was like the guy holding that boat against a 5-mile-an-hour tidal current while Icelandic ice divers were diving down to put airbags on the truck, lift it up, drag it to shore, flip it over, tow it up on shore, bring the chopper back, lift it up, and take it back down to civilization. Just not because there's any value in it, the thing's ruined, but to get it out of the environment. And we found that it only ended up leaking out a few quarts of diff oil and not very much at all. So compared to what a tanker does going by, like negligible effect at all. But we wanted to do that because of our respect for the Indigenous community. They were upset when it went in fair. That actually enabled us to make much deeper relationships and get to know them better and work with them and say, hey, we want to do the right thing. We want to get this out. And then we're like, and by the way, we no longer need the boats. Would you like the boats? And would you like the other equipment? And so it ended up being a kind of, I hope, a win for everybody. And for me, certainly a win because I got to know so many more of the Inuit up there and really I've learned some of the language, and incredible. Anyway, in terms of like, we haven't made a big deal of it, but we think it's probably outside of, I don't know what the military's done, but it's certainly the most difficult and largest civilian extraction of anything from the ocean floor in that part of the Arctic Circle, like in the Arctic, in the high Arctic. And it was incredible. So, it turned out to be all right. We learned. And then when we went back, through the next year, we didn't fall through those times. And, furthermore, in crossing the Arctic then this past year in early 2024, in the full Trans-Global Car Expedition, which was the point of the whole thing, we used the Russian amphibious vehicles through that section also. But then when we got up to near the North Pole, where we had to use the amphibious characteristics and also the the aluminum ice ladder characteristics and the ice picking and the incredibly hard work to get through this stuff. Like, we were almost at a walking pace some days. You have to all get out, and a half dozen of you are chipping ice while the other guys drive the vehicles through. You have these big spears you break up the ice blocks with. Incredibly physical. I lost 10 kilos. And then the vehicles are able to crawl over 6-wheel drive, 51-inch tires, crawl over these incredible gaps in the ice. If there's a little crack in the ice we can't cross, we have these aluminum bridging ladders that we're able to put down, drive across. The vehicles are incredibly well engineered. And then when they have to float, when we have a gap that we can't get across one of those ways, we actually float it in the water. And I can tell you, as somebody who does hard things with cars, the first time you drive a handmade amphibious vehicle into 10,000 feet of frigid Arctic Ocean water, and the blackness below your windscreen that dips below for a second is an eye-opener.
Yeah.
So it's, you drive off the perfectly good ice into the ocean. There's a roof hatch, and I basically had my hand on the hatch while I'm driving. But it was, again, an incredible experience, an incredible challenge. That was a long answer to another question.
Oh, all of these are going to be long answers. It's all good. Yeah, it's great. I was curious about the, I guess, response of the local community to like the return. So when you were going up to carry out the expedition after the truck went through the ice. And it sounds like from what you've said, the relationship is better because of it, perhaps. And I guess I'm wondering, my question is like, how did they anticipate the actual expedition? Because you guys are like, oh, by the way, this happened, but now we're coming back to do it again.
Yeah.
And how
So
did they feel from the people you talked to?
So the first time we showed up, they were like,
Long-winded
who are
question.
You? No. First time we showed up, they were like, "Who are you? This is kind of crazy." But they're very curious. Well, I don't want to stereotype, but there's a lot of curiosity and there's a lot of interest. But then when it went wrong, essentially, there was a little bit of tension and anger. It's their hunting grounds, and it's arguably not environmentally responsible. But then with the relationships we had to build, and then we took people in the trucks and we explained our thing, and we got to know so many people in all of the communities in central Nunavut that now, I've got 40 Facebook friends who are Inuit leaders in the north. Like, it's incredible. And for me, it's a privilege like no other. Like, it's of anything in the expedition, it's almost been the greatest privilege. And so the answer is we were really received with open arms. When I got to the North Pole, a 94-year-old elder woman and her daughter FaceTimed me and just wanted to see the North Pole. Right. And it's
totally
fantastic. And, I'm tearing up. Like, the support from the Indigenous community has been terrific. In the end, we had bumpy moments, but like any family or like any relationship, it's how you develop them and what you do at the end.
For sure. I was going to say too, like that area of the world is kind of like this distant concept for, I would say, most people in the world. And even as Canadians, the majority of the population lives so far south that is totally like this concept that we're not necessarily familiar with at all unless we've been there or been north.
Yeah.
So yeah, what a privilege to be able to be in that area that not many people get to go to and speak with people that I would say I don't know the percentage, but I want to say maybe 99% of Canadians probably will never get there.
I'm sure. It's very it's expensive and difficult, logistically difficult. There's hardly even places to stay. But you're talking about a culture that has 3 months of solid daylight in the summer and 3 months of solid darkness in the winter, and that have, for many generations, well, for thousands of years, was a sustenance existence on the land with with wildlife and eggs and berries and roots and incredible stuff. I've eaten muskox and seal and muktuk and whale, and it's incredible what they eat. And they're, and now there's it's a culture still in transition. They lived on the land, and they still call the land the Nuna, like the mother, or the land is just part of their fabric and part of what sustains them. And food from the land they call land food. Whereas food that comes from the south, which is anywhere south of there, like Edmonton is the south, Yellowknife's the south. But
yeah,
I know, right? For us, right, growing up,
whoa.
where'd you grow up?
At Kelowna, British Columbia.
Yeah, Kelowna. Yeah, I know. Yeah, we think the Yellowknife's the north, right? The Yellowknife's the south. They go down to Yellowknife to have babies at the hospital, right? And it's we're going south. It is. You draw a line above Yellowknife, and it's like a whole different world. And as a Canadian, as you say, like we're both Canadians, it's like I kind of knew in the abstract that was up there. Like, there's soapstone carvings and, pictures from the 60s and things, but it's like when you really see it. But truly, a culture in transition. They lived on the land. They were moved into communities in the 1950s and 60s. The whole residential school subject, like they've seen it, they've been there, and they've been encultured and then not. And there's still, Christianity there, but there's still paganism underneath it. It's really fascinating stuff just from a sociocultural angle. As a Canadian, I feel both very proud and a little bit ashamed, but, also optimistic that this is a distinct culture. And I've said this before, and I'm not afraid to say it. Like, so that island that we tracked the truck beside, nobody lives anywhere near there, right? Hundreds of kilometers. But they go out hunting in that area, right? Because it's still good hunting. Two Indigenous underwater drone operators from Iqaluit to help us on that expedition with the filming. We were hiking around the island, and one of them said, "Here's some tent circles." And I said, "What?" And it's, "Oh, here's a meat cache." Like, excuse me? And there were piles of rocks, sure enough, in a circle and in a dump. And then he said, "Oh, maybe it's a grave." And he started pulling. Oh no, it's probably meat cache. And he said, "But they're very old. Look how small they are." And he laid down in it, curled up. He said, "These are much too small. These are too late. These are more than 1,000 years old." I was like, "What?"
What?
Like, there's a cultural artifact of stones on this island that we just ran across. Right. And so we reported that to the Comie Heritage Organization. It's unsurprising because it's really good seal hunting grounds. Right. But people don't camp out there the same way that they did 1,000 years ago. But what Canada's like. You don't walk around Kelowna or Edmonton and say, "Oh, hey, here's a 1,000-year-old artifact."
No.
Happened to us. Happened to us on a what you would otherwise call a desolate island way in the middle of the Arctic Ocean.
Wow. Yeah.
Incredible.
That's
Anyway,
incredible stuff.
And so what I said then, and I'll say again, it's their land. Like they are the only ones who have been able to live there. We Southerners are like the tourists who are like, "Oh, well, we'll bring you sugar and fresh fruit and you must need vitamin C from oranges," but it turns out that you fought off scurvy for thousands of years by seal blubber. Like it's you can, and again, people in the overland community, you run into people from Indigenous cultures all around the world, in Central South America and Africa and so on. And there's a lot of cross pollination, a lot of learning, and some not learning, regrettably. But there's so much exposure and so much understanding that you're like, "Oh, okay, I kind of get what it's like in the, well, maybe not the Darien, but get what it's like in the Amazon or whatever." But in the Canadian High Arctic and the Inuit, it's still rare. You don't get to really connect with those people very easily. You got to spend a lot of time there. That's, again, I'm coming back around. It's a great privilege and an incredible eye opener in terms of as an overlander type, as an explorer. It's a real surprise.
Thanks for sharing your experiences up there with us. That's something most people will never do. So it's a privilege to be able to learn from somebody who's been there. So yeah, maybe
I like trucks.
Could you just give a quick rundown of which trucks were on the expedition? Yeah. I mean, I know there are multiple locations doing different things. So yeah, just a rundown of the vehicles involved.
It's horses for courses. You can't take the same vehicle all the way around the world on the surface, turns out. So for the continental crossing portions, we used, and this is like anywhere where there's a road, you used Ford Expeditions 2022 and 2023, lightly upfitted with BF Goodrich 35-inch tires. No lift necessary, actually, just clearance the fenders a tiny bit in ways you wouldn't notice. Bull bars on the front, auxiliary lights, security stuff inside, drawer in the back, onboard air. Bit of electronic upfit, radios, and a couple of them with Starlinks. And that's what has been the bread and butter for Europe, Africa, South America, Central America, and now back to New York. And we started from New York up to Yellowknife with them. Then we ended up, so one of the vehicles that we took, and actually that I was lucky to drive in that first ever route from Yellowknife to the Arctic Ocean that we pioneered, was an F-150 upfitted by Arctic Trucks. Oh, and by the way, those expeditions built by Arctic Trucks also out of the American Cheyenne, Wyoming facility, but relatively modest upfits, beefy SUV. But the F-150s are proper Arctic Trucks built trucks on 44-inch Nokian tires of the Arctic Trucks variety, co-engineered by Arctic Trucks, the tires themselves. With central tire inflation, able to deflate, we run them as low as 3 PSI and regularly run them as low as 7, 8 PSI. And we had one of them that was an electric hybrid, the Power Boost, F-150 Power Boost. And I was lucky to drive that vehicle. So the vehicle that I drove over that first ever route from Yellowknife to the Arctic Ocean was a hybrid, which I'm proud of also. That vehicle, actually, we converted for use throughout the rest of the expedition also. So that vehicle has gone further than any of them, and it has accompanied the expeditions, the Ford expeditions, through Europe, Africa, South America, Central America, and further north than Yellowknife. And that's actually a really amazing vehicle. And in fact, I think we're going to be showing it at the New York Auto Show, so I'm kind of proud of that. So those are like the Continental and slightly large tired vehicles. Then for Antarctica, and for a certain portion of the Arctic, we use the biggest Arctic trucks, which are 6-wheel drive, Ford Super Duty 6x6s with 44-inch Nikian tires, which you may have seen from the Antarctica footage. They are, we have 2 that are utility decks, 2 that are camper types that we're able to sleep in. Not fancy camp. Well, one's pretty fancy, but the other is pretty basic worker accommodations, kind of a couple of benches you can sleep on, tools and stuff. But they are the ones that we used to cross Antarctica edge to edge through the South Pole. And they are the biggest, beefiest, gnarliest things that Arctic Trucks has ever built. They have built a lot like that, but they're big units. And again, we're running the tires on central tire inflation as low as 3 psi in a dire emergency, but 4 or 5 psi through the day, and then 7 psi if you're saving the tires. And remember, you talk about a vehicle dependent expedition. Like when you have 4 spare tires across Antarctica, we had a couple of tire damages early. It's like you start to get really careful about how you deal with your tires. And then for the Arctic Ocean, where there would be open water or where there's a real risk of breaking through, we use these hand-built amphibious vehicles by a famous Russian mountain climber named Vasily Alagin, who climbed every mountain in the world and then decided that he wanted to go to the North Pole. And so he looked at all the amphibious vehicles built in Russia. You may have heard of Sherps or some of the other large ones. And he engineered basically what I call a race car for the Arctic. It is incredibly lightweight. It does one thing extremely well, which is get to the North Pole. You wouldn't want to drive it on a normal street. You wouldn't want to take it anywhere else. But it's like a Volkswagen Westphalia with 51-inch flotation tires, also a central tire inflation, and a bilge pump. And you're able to float it in the Arctic Ocean. It's incredible. And hand-built, like angle aluminum space frame with a 2-liter Toyota diesel motor longitudinally mounted with a transmission remote linkage that's upside down. So first gear is like over and back and everything's backwards. You have to remember that. And then after the first week, you get the feeling for it. But Mitsubishi Pajero locking differentials, 3 of them. And he himself he previously had done a pre-run for the Dakar in I think 85. So, incredibly competent vehicles, insanely competent. And, locking, along with the bilge pump, every locking diff, incredibly lightweighted. The whole thing, huge, looks huge, looks like a big box. You can sleep in the back, but it weighs about the same as a Toyota Camry. Because 1 millimeter thick aluminum body, 15,000 aluminum hand rivets on each vehicle, and the ability to float, like insanity vehicles. I'd love to have one, but I don't know what I'd ever do with it except to go to the Arctic again.
Right.
And like the steering column, handmade, drilled out, 3 pounds. The seat, 7 pounds. Plastic Russian bus seat. Like everything lightweight because the guy's a climber, right? Like these are people who cut their toothbrushes in half, and race cars for the Arctic. So we're privileged to use those to cross the Arctic. When, we had moments, there was a moment or two where it was questionable whether we'd actually make it. So take the most refined possible vehicle for doing a task and go right on the edge of maybe not making it with it. That's what the Arctic crossing was like. We had some, coming down to Greenland from the North Pole, it was getting late in the season, things were starting to melt, and we were having a hard time making headway with some bad weather. And bad weather up there, like, it's minus 40 mile an hour wind, 0 visibility, and, you have moving ice flows because the whole thing is moving. Like that's the other thing. The whole Arctic isn't fixed. It's all a moving ice flow and grinding up against each other and making minefields of pressure ridges and things you have to crush down to get through. We got down not too far from the coast of Greenland, and there was like a 2-kilometer gap of open water, which is too wide for us to cross. And we tried for a couple of days to get across, find ways around, fly our drones up and down, look for a way to get around, and we couldn't do it. And we were, we had search and rescue organized, but it would have been a heck of a thing to extract us, and it wouldn't gotten the vehicles out. And we went to bed at night, like despairing, maybe it's not going to happen. Maybe we're going to have to like figure out how to swim out of here or something. And we went to bed, and the wind shifted overnight. We woke up, and the 2 ice places hit each other. And we like, we were banging on each other's vehicles. Get out of here! Go, 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 go! And we just like managed to get across this. Just the ice, the whole Arctic ice flow had changed overnight. I can tell you more blood-curdling stories. There's not just one thing like that. There's lots of those that were darn close things. That's one of the reasons that I don't think anybody will do it again. The ice is getting thinner. It's really, really hard. You have to use these vehicles. They've twice been in the North Pole before, but from the Russian side, and never continent to continent in this direction. and never part of a global expedition. But that's what this guy wanted to do, right? And so he engineered how to do it, and he became part of the expedition like I did, and through Emil Grimson, actually. Anyway, the point of the story is the logistics of it too. We had to have a couple of fuel drops by airplane and helicopter, which were expensive and logistically incredibly difficult and incredibly beautiful. Like until I was the guy on the satellite phone navigating the Basler, which is a modified DC, beautiful plane, and we'd loaded it up with. So we needed some extra radio gear and frozen fish. We ate a lot of frozen fish. We bought 100 kilograms
I
of
was
frozen
going to
fish.
ask about that
Yeah,
because I've never obviously okay, so I've never been to the Arctic, I've never been to the Antarctic, but I'm like,
sure.
oh, they're probably just having dehydrated food. And then I read something
Yeah.
about the fish, and I'm like, tell me more about the fish. And this is an aside.
Yeah. So you become a connoisseur of the dried food for sure. There's the American stuff, the mountain high or whatever it's called, and then there's the Norwegian stuff, Riel Tourmat, which is a lot richer and you can only eat for so long. And then there's Russian stuff, dried food, which is gala gala. It's called very exotic, also space food. By far the most nourishing and the easiest to deal with for a long time. The Russian stuff is really good. It's probably how their cosmonauts lasted so long. But quite rightly, these guys who are there's a lot of really sophisticated outdoorsmen on the team, a lot of mountain climbers. And Vasily Alagin, this legendary 70+ Russian guy, was like, Andrew, we will need some fish. Will you help us get some fish? I'm like, oh, okay. So we're in Yellowknife, and I hooked up with a local fisherman. Good. We will take 110 kilograms. Like, what? Like whitefish, this long, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how many fish that was. It was like, 50 fish or something, or 30, 40 fish. Anyway, wrapped them all in saran wrap, hucked them into barrels behind the vehicles. They all froze. And so that led to 3 months, well, three times up there, but on the main expedition, 3 months of eating shaved fish, which is like sushi, and you dip it in salt and pepper and soy sauce and just eat it raw. Or you take a saw and cut like fillets of the fish and you broil it or fry it. We ate fish in every form, and it was delicious. And we never got sick, and we were never wanting for energy. It was great. And augmented with the Russian stuff doesn't come with full meals. It's like you can have a little side of potatoes, or you can have a little side of beets, and that's how we survived for months. Big language gap. I had to learn some Russian. They had to learn some English. That was a challenge, but it was also a great experience. What else? Vasily Shagnovsky had to solve a lot of issues, logistically, planning, and just made big commitments. The airdrops were expensive. Everything was expensive, and that's another reason I don't think it'll happen again. And for example, there's a North Pole. So if you want to ski to the North Pole or want to do something ridiculous at the North Pole, there has for the last number of years been a station that's established seasonally quite near the North Pole by airdropping things in and then building up a little station there and making a runway quite near to the North Pole. Barneo Station, it's called. And it used to be a Russian station that got bought by a Swede, and that's sort of like a co-branded Swedish-Russian thing, which has fallen apart thanks to the conflicts. And tell you what, Russia-Ukraine conflict has been a big challenging thing for us because we have a lot of Russians on the team. And then what I can tell you is that the Russians aren't the bad people. It's bad people within Russia that are the bad people, right? But the Russians that we've worked with have always been princes, really great people. And I know you've worked with tons of people around the world, right? We have Ukrainians on our team. And we have on our expedition north, the expedition leader, Vasily, his wife is Ukrainian. He lives in Switzerland. One of the main mechanics is Ukrainian, and that's when the war broke out, when we were up there together. And by satellite, he arranged for that guy's family to be extracted from Kiev and moved to his house in Switzerland, where they still live now, to get him out of the war with his kid and his wife. And so, it's a much more complicated thing than it's made out to be. But all the Russians that I've worked with, including the 170 Russians on the ship that we were on for 3 weeks getting to Antarctica, they're initially very leery of us, and me in particular. I was the only English speaker on the boat, but they ended up being princes, and I've got a lot of new friends there too, which is a huge eye opener. You realize that we're all deep down we're the same, and that it's just circumstances have pulled us in different directions, right? This is what you learn overlanding or traveling or whatever. And it makes you much more open-minded to everybody and to stories on all sides. And I've learned a lot about the Russian culture too. Fascinating people. Anyway, the point of the story, Russians across the pole, also very like overlanding people, but like these guys they're tough. Like when there's a blizzard on and you're like getting out to stand on top of your vehicle to like look through the 40-mile-an-hour wind at like which way you can possibly get over the next ice ridge, and then you get out and chip ice. Like uncompromising people. They've already summited Everest. They've already done every hard thing you can imagine. Like, it was a privilege to work with the team, these people. Yeah, I mean, the
Yeah,
Icelandic
that
guys. I
it's
mean,
such
I'm
a
leaving out all the Arctic Trucks guys. Like in Antarctica, you've got like not just Emil, but his whole crew. But also like like Clint and Torvi were like out. I don't know how Torvi's fingers didn't fall off, but we had to do some heavy work on one of the vehicles, and they had to rebuild the trailer several times. Like just badass dudes, whether Icelandic or Russian or Marcel from the U.S., also a tough guy, steeled in rallying, but now in overlanding and expedition stuff. And I like to think that I'm not as tough as those guys, but I'm tough-ish. It was hard work.
what a crazy experience. All of that, wonderful, unique, bringing people together from all over the world on a common goal, working towards it as one is a beautiful
Oh
thing
yeah.
for sure.
Oh,
Always.
exactly. And I mean, I don't think I've digested it all yet. It's funny just talking about it again with you. I'm like, wow, it's like what I've learned about Russia and Ukraine, about Icelandics. Like even Icelandic culture, I've learned so much about. And
Yeah, yeah.
look, your followers with the vehicles and so on. Obviously, this is from just a vehicle point of view. This is the most, it's an incredible achievement. The vehicles are very exotic, especially the Arctic trucks and the Himalaya amphibious vehicles. But it's for us, it's the Everest of what we can do with cars, and then it's still hard to know what to do next. That's why I'm getting into robot cars, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you have any sort of dreams or projects on the horizon that you can
Yeah.
share or that you have in mind or
Yeah,
yeah.
well, look, I'm always up for a challenge, and the great thing is, I already knew Chris Collard and Chris Walker and some of the folks and Jen Scott Brady from previous shenanigans that I was into. But if they're now proposing to me, hey, we should go do this thing, or we got to go to Honduras, or we got to do this other thing. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. And then eventually, like, can I take my family too, or can we do some crazy stuff together? So there'll be that stuff. But I'll be honest, and this maybe your followers will find this interesting. I spent a lifetime trying to do the next thing, the harder thing, right? And I had a moment that I didn't expect. Like the North Pole was a huge satisfaction. I put a Canadian flag in the North Pole, and I was like, wow, it's like I really felt I was standing on top of the world. I was like, oh, it's really. I felt like I was on top of a big ball. It's psychological, but still, big deal. Um, but then crossing Antarctica, huge achievement, very hard. I mean, the East Antarctic Plateau we haven't talked about. It's like 2,000 kilometers at 3 kilometers of elevation, right? And you have to actually add 22% to that because of the magnetic pole. The poles, actually, the air is thinner. So we were at effectively like 14,000 feet of elevation, and we went up very quickly from the coast. So we were like, it was like minus 35 with a 30-mile-an-hour wind, but we're at 14,000 feet with these vehicles, right? Like incredible. We underplay Antarctica. It's like, it was incredibly hard, right? And that's where we're working on the vehicles out in the cold too, right? Anyway, so that was hard too. And then we got to the South Pole, and it's like, well, South Pole, but there's a research station there. There's a camp there. It's not, in some senses, it doesn't seem as exotic. But then when you get down to Union Glacier, and you meet all these like glassy-eyed skiers who have a 10,000-foot gaze of like, they've just skied to the South Pole and they're like just recovering. But then we got down to the coast and we finished the crossing, and I totally didn't expect it. And I had this feeling of like, oh, that's done. Like I just achieved some really incredible stuff with cars. Not to be big about it, but I crossed the whole north part of the world, the whole Arctic cap, and then we've crossed the whole of Antarctica with this team. And 7 of us have done it. So 7 of us have crossed the whole north and the whole south. And I had a moment like, that's not done then. There's nothing harder that I can think of. Now, there's individual harder things. The Darien, it would still be a dream, but it's so dangerous now. As I said, when the FARC controlled it, at least you know who your enemy was, or the guy you're paying off was. But now with drug trafficking and human trafficking and stuff, the Darien is terribly dangerous. So I'm not sure when that could happen. It would still be a dream to cross that. But I'm changing my goals a little at 53 years old, and my goal now with the stunt driving and race driving and snow driving, I was a big snow rallyist too. Snow is kind of my specialty. I'm hoping to distill some of that experience and knowledge into making the self-driving cars drive better. So that's a new challenge.
Nice. I look forward to hearing more about that and yeah, what your next steps are. But I also wanted to ask you, what do you do in your spare time when you're not doing all these expeditions and stunt driving and self-driving
Yeah.
cars? What are your hobbies? Have you had like a great vacation in the last 5 years you could speak to? Do you have like what do you have a family? Yeah.
Yeah. So look, fair question. I feel very lucky that I've been able to make something of a career of just the stuff I really like to do. So the answer is, basically no. I do like to fiddle with cars. I've got some old cars. I've got a 1919 Model T Ford that, the kids helped me work on, and we used to pick up the Christmas tree here in Hollywood, which, to everybody's delight. It's got like the Awooga horn and the whole thing. And I restored that car, and I'm only 53 years old, but it's like I'm 80 or 90 years old. I'm like, well, the thing about the Model T. So I like that enough. But I love travel. I've been lucky to travel a lot through my life, and not just on this recent spate, but previously. And I now newly love my family and kids, and see things through their eyes now. And I want to take them places. We're going to take them on some adventure traveling this spring. Your goals shift, and it becomes less about you, and you become the frame for the next generation. That they're in the middle of the picture. So I'm excited about that. Hobbies. It's probably always been something to do with cars. I like watches. I used to build watches, and I like machines, but I basically like adventure and challenge and exploration. So everything I get to do usually has something to do with that. And by the way, let me blow a
Great.
little smoke on Overland, no, positive smoke up the bum of Overland Journal. Like I've been, I remember reading the glossies. Like I used to have many copies. I still have quite a few actually of Overland Journal from the day. And I remember thinking, oh wow, I wonder if someday. I mean, this is 20 years ago. I wonder if someday I could be one of those guys. And sure enough, now I get to be one of those guys. Now I get to talk with you. So it's exciting for me to sort of have that achievement. To hopefully be in the pages, yeah, and then actually, my big hope would be to like inspire the next people coming after me, like people that I read about in there, or expeditions that I looked at in there, saying like, oh wow, look at how far out they are, and look how hard that must be. How did they do that? How did they have to innovate? What do they have to make up in the field? Yeah, and we built plenty of stuff in the field. Now to be able to hopefully get back to that tradition, I would love also.
Yeah, pass the baton. And I think that when you touched on self-belief pretty much throughout the entire podcast, I think that message of building those blocks of self-belief,
Yeah,
then
and
you
have a
have
good
that
team.
framework. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Work
That
with other people.
helps.
You can't do this kind of stuff as a loner. So I was giving an interview to CBC in Canada, actually, I think on our first expedition, and I said, well, and they're saying, how do you know you're going to be able to achieve this? I'm like, well, behind me are like half the world's like three oh wait, all of the world's experts at driving on the poles are standing behind me right now. Like, literally, between Vasilia Logan's team and Emil Grimson's Icelandic Arctic Trucks team, all of the experts were on this expedition. And so, it's a miracle in some senses we succeeded, but it would have been kind of embarrassing if we didn't succeed. I mean, nobody would have succeeded otherwise. This was the dream team, and I'm lucky I got to be in the middle of that. Have a team.
Absolutely.
Vasily Shagnovsky. The best thing about our expedition leader is that he is a team builder, and he respects people's abilities. So he said to Emil Grimson, "Okay, you do the route, you do Antarctica. Vasily Logan, once Emil's route runs out, you do over the North Pole. You've been there before." It's like, this is a guy who helped decommission Chernobyl after the meltdown. Like, he's like he has a technician's mind to build the team, and that's what he did here. Fortunately, I had a role, and we all put our shoulder to the wheel, and made it happen.
And well, thank you so much for sharing all of these great stories and taking us places that most of us will never go. Yeah, just everything. It's been so great chatting with you. I foresee another podcast in the future because I feel like there were so many things that we didn't touch on that I wanted to.
Yeah.
And
Well,
there will
the
also
expedition.
be an article in Overland Journal about the Transglobal Car Expedition too, so people can see it in the pages as you mentioned earlier. But
Oh yeah.
yeah,
I will frame that edition. That will be a very proud thing for me to be in that magazine. And we have a huge stock of super high quality photos and video that we're happy to completely open up to you. And the expedition isn't quite done yet. We're still moving up through Central America now, and we'll be finishing in New York City roughly around April 6th, we reckon, or first week of April, maybe a little later. So. and I'll be there for that. It'll be a culmination. We'll be back at the Explorers Club and Times Square, where we drove out from. And we look forward to that. But then we look forward to sharing you and with all your readers. And if people have any questions, feel free to reach out to Transglobal on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook, and through the webpage. And you can ask any questions you have or see the content there.
Transglobal.com.
Transglobalcar.com.
Yeah. I was like, is it org? But yeah, it's .com. So transglobalcar.com.
Yeah.
And then all the
And I think
socials.
the
That's
Instagram is
great.
Transglobal Car and Facebook is Transglobal Car.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Andrew, so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you about all these great adventures you've been on. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much. Well, I really respect what you guys do and your whole team and Scott and you and all the stories that you guys have too. I got to tell all the stories this time, but I look forward to us having a beer sometime and you tell me all your stories too. I got to have the podium this time, but let's have a next one.
It's a date. Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much to the Overland Journal podcast listeners for tuning into this episode, and we will catch you next time.